A very uncertain time, and we're hopeful to provide some certainty in this space sooner rather than later.
75% tariff put on that, it effectively shuts down the trade to there.
China just cut off Canada's oil exports. A brutal strike shattered the nation overnight and sent Carney spiraling. The economy is bleeding out. Families are collapsing under fear and uncertainty, and the heartbeat of Canada's energy dream has been ripped out, leaving the country gasping in chaos.
Canadian officials, including Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, are in China, advocating for the removal of tariffs.
Canada just got blindsided. China pulled the plug, Carney is panicking, and the economy is in flames. This wasn't a slow leak or a quiet warning. It was a full-scale economic gut punch. Farmers are staring at fields that suddenly aren't worth what they were yesterday. And Ottawa, they're busy with photo ops while the country burns.
Expecting tariffs, especially this huge.
At the center of this storm stand the key players. Mark Carney, freshly sworn in as Prime Minister in April 2025, was dreaming he'd ride a wave of economic resilience. Scott Moe, Premier of Saskatchewan, left, explaining to farmers why their livelihoods are now at the mercy of Beijing, and above them both sits China, pulling strings like a silent puppeteer. But how did we even get here? Let's rewind.
Canola, and as long as these tariffs are in place, we don't have that predictability, we don't have that stability.
And then came the boom. By March 2025, exports had exploded to 353,674 barrels per day. China wasn't just buying oil, it had become Canada's second largest customer. Ottawa walked with swagger. Look at us, they thought, as finally a global player. But there was a catch. Canada thought it had leverage. In reality, it had walked onto Beijing's chessboard, and Beijing was already 3 moves ahead. And on August 12, 2025, Canada failed.
Price points for Saskatchewan's canola industry, and I would say ultimately Saskatchewan's ag producers.
Beijing went nuclear, 75.8% anti-dumping tariffs on Canadian canola. Officially, it was about crops. In reality, it was about oil. Prairie farmers saw bids collapse by a full $1 per bushel overnight. Thousands of dollars gone before harvest even began. Whole towns braced for job losses. Everyone knew the truth. Canola was just the smokescreen. The real target was Canada's oil lifeline.
The size of the tariffs, the products they are applied to, and the length of time they're in place. So the more time that goes on that these tariffs are not addressed, the impacts get more widespread.
Because this wasn't new. China had already pulled the same move on the US, cutting crude imports by 90% between 2023 and 2025. Canada mistook that as an opening, thinking, we're the new favorite. Wrong. What China was really doing was setting up another dependency, this time with Canada. And just like that, one flick of Beijing's wrist turned Canada's oil miracle into a curse.
I am extremely disappointed with respect to the decision that the country of China has made in further increasing their temporary tariffs on our canola seeds, which will add to...
Scott Moe saw it firsthand. Farmers who were already drowning in costs now had no buyers. Oil producers who thought they'd cracked global markets suddenly realized their biggest customer had a knife to their throat. The shockwave was brutal. A nation blindsided, a prime minister caught flat-footed, and a foreign power using Canada's own lifeline as a chokehold.
Chinese government agencies responsible for imposing the steep tariffs on Canadian canola products. Talks, he said, were much more positive.
Moe didn't waste time. Fresh off a whirlwind trip through China, Japan, and South Korea, he landed in Ottawa jet-lagged but fired up. His message? Enough with the photo ops. Fix the system. He demanded regulatory reform and real market certainty, not band-aids, not vague promises. Actual change to let Saskatchewan and Alberta do what they do best: power the economy.
His commitment to our country, obviously he's working for the people of Saskatchewan, but commitment to our country and contribution at the tables have been essential to getting us together and moving forward.
And Carney, instead of facing the storm, he smiled for cameras, then jetted off to Davos. Because nothing screams man of the people like sipping champagne in Switzerland while producers at home can't get approvals for projects worth billions. The contrast couldn't be starker, Moe begging for reforms, Carney polishing his global image.
Canola farmers have been very frustrated with the federal government because they put in tariffs on China's imports in, and this is a retaliatory tariff on canola.
But the real heartbreak was farmers. 20 million acres of farmland, a $43 billion industry, wrecked by a single tariff strike. Farmers like Ryan Hofford in Manitoba watched bids collapse overnight. One day you think you can keep the farm afloat, the next day you're in the hole thousands before harvest even starts.
Beijing launched an anti-dumping probe against Canadian canola after Ottawa put tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle imports.
Ottawa's answer? A shrug. Carney's trade minister, Champagne, insisted tariffs on Chinese EVs must stay to protect Canadian workers. Protect workers? Mo fired back. What about Saskatchewan workers? Because Ottawa's alignment with Washington over EVs came at a price, and Beijing made sure prairie families paid the bill.
In finding our way through what is a pretty difficult time for a significant Canadian industry.
Even Canada's southern lifeline was crumbling. Oil exports to the U.S. dropped from 4.3 million barrels per day in mid-2024 to just 3.1 million by March 2025. Washington's tariffs slammed the door. Sure, Western Canadian Select's discount narrowed, but what good is a better price if the barrels are sitting in storage?
And again, no real indication from our federal government as to what sort of support as producers we could be expecting in the future.
So Carney rolled out his master plan. Resilience measures, loan increases, biofuel promises, tweaks to clean fuel rules. Farmers laughed bitterly. How do you borrow your way into market access? A loan doesn't erase a 75.8% tariff. Biofuel talk doesn't reopen China. Tweaking clean fuel rules is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Tariffs on canola came up unexpectedly. If they can come on fast, then come off fast. And the Chinese are just going to want something in return.
And here's where Carney made his biggest blunder. He copied Trump's tariff playbook, except Trump had leverage. America could swing its weight and still get deals. Canada was swinging an empty bat. By sticking too close to Washington, Ottawa left itself stranded. No independent trade strategy, no real leverage, just exposure to Beijing's retaliation.
Economic driver. Allison.
Sandy, a resolution isn't going to happen overnight, and Premier Scott Moe has made it clear that an agreement can only be reached between Prime Minister Mark Carney and China's president.
The results? A nation unraveling. Scott Moe pleading for reforms that could unleash billions. Farmers crushed by tariffs, workers losing jobs, and a prime minister holding an empty toolbox while pretending he's building a fortress. The disconnect between rhetoric and reality couldn't be more painful.
China has announced a preliminary duty on Canadian canola imports. The provisional rate of 75.8% will come into effect on Thursday.
Meanwhile, China played hardball. When Beijing wants something, it doesn't negotiate. It slams tariffs and waits for the other side to crawl back. That's exactly what Canada faced. Carney bragged about having the first prime ministerial call with China since 2017. Sounds big, right? Except it ended with nothing. No deal, no relief, just polite words and a deadline. For China, Canada wasn't a partner. It was an afterthought.
This hit will stop a significant amount of trade that is flowing into China today.
But this isn't just politics, it's people's lives. Out on the prairies, farmers head into harvest with zero certainty. Do they dump crops at fire sale prices just to survive? Do they gamble on storage, hoping for markets that may never open? Either way, they're staring at losses that could sink them for good.
What they want is some certainty for those crops they're going to harvest in terms.
Farmers, workers, and exporters were left hanging, watching their livelihoods collapse while politicians sold empty promises. This wasn't just bad luck, it was geopolitical chess, and Canada wasn't even on the board. Beijing moved with precision. Ottawa, it never even saw the move coming.
It's set at 75.8%. That's on Canadian canola seed as of August the 14th, this Thursday. That will have a devastating impact on the price points for Saskatchewan's canola industry, and I would say ultimately Saskatchewan's ag producers.
And here's the brutal truth. This collapse is live right now. Energy exports strangled, agriculture suffocated, investment frozen because who would bet billions on a country with no market certainty? It's a house of cards collapsing in plain sight.
That is another potential impact for Western Canadian ag producers that we just simply can't withstand at this moment.
Which brings us to Carney's legacy. He entered office styled as the polished global savior, the man who would steady Canada. Instead, history will remember him as worse than Trudeau. Trudeau had charisma. Carney has red tape. He clung to outdated policies, shadowed Washington without its leverage, and let Beijing dictate the rules. The result? Canada alienated both the US and China, the two biggest economies in the world. That's not bad luck. That's catastrophic leadership.
The impacts get more widespread.
Canada thought it had struck gold, but in reality, it had walked straight into a trap. Beijing never wanted a partner, it wanted a pawn. Once Canada was hooked, China slammed the door shut, leaving Ottawa scrambling in the dark. The so-called oil miracle turned into a nightmare almost overnight. So here's the question: can Canada survive under leaders who sell out their own backbone industries? Or is this trade war, this tariff chaos, this blind loyalty to Washington truly the beginning of a national collapse? Because right now, all signs point to a country with no plan, no leverage, and no safety net for the people holding it up.